Procurement is continually evolving, and I don't think we're anywhere near close to scratching the value surface that we can bring across directs and indirects. We're still evolving our relationships, our processes, our people, our systems, and our specialists in the field.
Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. The larger pharma companies are renowned for spending a lot on management consultants and other professional services. In today's episode, I speak to Cameron Smith, currently Global Procurement Senior Partner of Professional Services at Novartis, about his experience in this complicated category and where the opportunities are for managing it better. Cameron, thank you so much for joining us. Really nice to have you on the podcast.
No worries. Thanks, Luke. Thanks for the invitation. It's quite exciting.
Looking at your career, you're a real expert in procurement of professional services. So law firms, management consultants, merchant banks, and the like. Having done that in a wide range of industries, automotive, financial services, oil and gas, and now pharma, I'm interested to hear about what that breadth of experience that you've brought with you into pharma has sort of shown you about where the opportunities are within the pharma industry. But let's start off talking about your experience. It'd be great to hear how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, so I ended up in procurement by chance. I was a lawyer for, I studied law at university and then practiced as an insurance litigator in Australia, and had a run of locum work, locum opportunities, for 5 years. And eventually I was made redundant with an hour and a half's notice in my last legal job. And that was kind of a pivotal moment. By chance, I happened to be traveling that evening with a friend who was in procurement. He said he was looking for people. And then 20 plus years later, I'm still doing it. So I literally fell into the career because procurement, when I was going through high school, didn't exist as a concept. It happened. Mm-hmm. It was one of those functions that happened in every business. My parents were teachers and they used to get a catalogue of supplies. Somebody had to do that. That was in the mid-1980s. Somebody had to do that. But there wasn't a recognised profession for procurement. It was more like an administrative function. Mm-hmm. Focus had always been on top-line growth rather than bottom-line expense. And it was only in the mid to late 1990s that a lot of big businesses saw the opportunity from doing things more strategically in procurement and ensuring that the value is not dissipated, that they can leverage, they can de-risk their supply chain, that they can actually save a lot of money by doing things in a lot more coordinated, administratively more convenient way, and also with a lot more governance. So I started work with Telstra in the infancy of strategic sourcing, and in the 3 years that I was there, we kind of elevated the function from being a pens and paper, travel, the usual put downs that you hear from stakeholders that procurement isn't a strategic function. Mm-hmm. We elevated that from quite an administrative function into a strategic function that supported the sales line. For example, we were doing deals that enabled the sales line to grow. I was responsible for a deal where we were selling debt that we were restructuring the debt collection and data management and customer attraction and retention model. So it's through those sorts of programs where it elevates the function, it elevates the thinking to something a little bit more strategic than what it was. Mm-hmm. And I think it's still growing because I think as businesses have seen the opportunity that procurement creates, they've actually carved out a niche in a lot of their businesses to ensure that things are done more strategically, that the business is de-risked on its supply chain, that governance and control is maintained and improved, much more so than it was, say, 20 or 30 years ago. Now, in pharma is a very interesting one because you're not dealing with millions in terms of the denominator of spend. You're dealing with billions. This is a much bigger industry than any that I've worked in before, and some of those have been quite significant as well. But the risks on pharma or with pharma as an industry are much greater than a lot of the other industries like FMCG, like oil and gas is similar because there's a lot of long-term investment involved. Banking and finance, very short-term in terms of its decision-making, short to medium term. Pharma is something that has to take a long-term view, and you have to have that thinking in mind when you're making decisions that support your, or help make decisions that support your function. So, for example, if we're doing a deal with a strategy house, that strategy will should help define what the business looks like for the short to medium term. Mm-hmm. It should then tie in with a lot of the drug development cycles and pipeline. It should look at growth opportunities in markets. So it's the function of what I do and what my team do doesn't really change industry to industry to industry. But once you get into pharma, you realize the politics and the different scale and environment that you have to be aware of when supporting your stakeholders in making those decisions. If you're not, you're going to be left behind very quickly, and they're going to take a fairly dim view of what sort of value you can bring to the table.
What's driving that?
It's a level of regulation that I don't think exists in any other industry. Mm-hmm. Now, I've worked for a tobacco company. I've worked for a brewing company. I've worked in banking organisations, and I've worked in oil and gas. They're probably the most heavily regulated environments that I've been exposed to. But the level of regulation with the FDA, for example, as kind of the default global regulator, has really it's really raised the bar on all of the regulation for the industry. And if you don't comply, you don't get to sell your product. You could spend 10 years of development in the drug cycle and the various stage gates and testing protocols. If you don't have that regulatory sign off, that's 10 years worth of investment that is lost potentially. And some of these drugs take 10 to 15 years in their development cycle, and they'll go through various phases along the way, and they'll shoot off and find solutions for other problems. But it is the level of regulation that makes the investment so critical, because it is such a long-term investment. Tobacco, for example, hasn't changed in its makeup since Walter Raleigh came back from the Far East with something that people would roll up and set fire to for enjoyment. Yes, it is regulated more so than it was, say, 30, 40, 100 years ago, but not. Pharmaceutical regulation is next level. It is off the charts, no comparison.
Mm-hmm. What impacts would you say that the margins that the pharma industry enjoys has on the decision making and also on procurement? What difference does it make?
Yeah, so on that, I think businesses that operate in very lean environments will have a much greater cost focus. Those that operate in much higher margins obviously carry, as I was talking about just a second ago, have a lot more risk baked into their operating model, but they also have potentially a greater revenue opportunity as a result of that investment, that long-term, medium to long-term investment. As a result, you do get a level of, and I'm not singling out any particular organisation here, you do get a level of profligacy on expense. Some things are deemed to be too big to fail. Some investments are seen as, let's just worry about delivery and not as much about cost. Let's worry about everything other than the commercial side of things, because we need to get this done. This is an imperative. And we do get that pressure. That's a pressure that doesn't go away. And I think that this is a bit of a mindset shift, industry to industry. And I've always taken the view, and I quote this a lot, I spend or help spend the company's money as I would spend my own. If I don't feel comfortable, if I don't think I'm getting a good deal, if I think that there's a better opportunity, if I'm spending my own money, I'll pursue it. And I expect the same of others. Sometimes there is the case that there's this tunnel vision view by stakeholders to agree to only what they want to agree, and it does take a bit of a mindset shift for them to consider other options. And that's the same with oil and gas upstream. Okay, high margin. They have this view that X supplier is the only one that can deliver that, and that's endemic across a lot of other industries as well. But given the scale of pharma and some of the companies involved, and the risk that's potentially borne, there does become a bit of a tunnel vision mindset creeping in.
Do you see that in the areas that you're responsible for? So professional services, say use of management consultants. The life sciences industry has always been heavily reliant on management consultants. That profligacy, do you see that coming into there as well?
Yeah, and I've got to temper my word profligacy. It's profligacy, or sorry, it can be seen from the outside in as profligacy. Mm-hmm. My view is that there's always a better deal available on benchmarking and through competition, and that's both qualitative and through the commercial structure. If you test something, if you get a different opinion, you might expose yourself to something you weren't aware of, and that then results, the competitive tension of that results in theoretically, in most cases, a better deal. So that's what we're trying to introduce.
How are you approaching that benchmarking of professional services?
A number of ways. We have a conversation with stakeholders to question the validity, and you've got to be very gentle with some of these guys, some of these people, because they are very, very senior. Mm-hmm. They have been doing it longer. They sometimes question what role procurement can add. So it's a gentle, kind of a tiptoe around it to the point where you suggest, have you considered this organisation? Would you mind having a conversation with this partner? And some of them are left field, some of them are ignored. So, for example, of the three blue sky management consulting agents that I believe have the scale and the coverage and the intellect or over the global market in which we operate, the company that I work for now only uses traditionally two of those. But sometimes you throw it in like a grenade to say, would you mind having a talk with the third for a different opinion? And it may not be it may not be relevant for the particular engagement you're talking about, but it's there in the back of the mind that it says, oh, okay, well, I hadn't considered them now, but actually we've got something coming up that they would be really perfect for as an alternative view. And as a result, the company I work for at the moment is doing a spin-off, and the third company that has not been traditionally considered is now a walk-up start to be their advisor of choice into the future as a spun-off organisation. There is also some legacy activity that if an organisation, whether it be Big Four, specialist, boutique, blue sky, has done a piece of work in the past, then obviously they're going to be the shoe-in for continuation or variation of any extension of that going forward. And there's very little you can do about that. So once some of these firms get an entrenched position, it's very, very hard to shift them unless you're willing to do something sort of scorched earth, or there's an error or a failure which no one wants. They don't want it, we don't want it, because there's a whole lot of mess to clear up, and it doesn't reflect back. It doesn't reflect well on not only the supplier, the industry, but also the client, because the client has made those choices in the past. It's an evolving state. The panel that I inherited when I started in this back in 2019 is very different from the panel that exists now. The commercial structures were always on the basis of time and materials. This is another way of showing stakeholders that things can be done a little bit differently. And I hate time and materials because it indicates in a lot of instances that across legal, across consulting and advisory, that an advisor knows how to start a stopwatch and stop a stopwatch, not necessarily what you want to be delivered. And if you can then identify more closely what your requirements are, start scoping that out, it becomes very difficult for a service provider to say, look, the only way is time and materials. They can then sort of start scoping that for a fixed fee and start looking at opportunities for increasing value in the engagement.
Could you give me some examples of the types of deliverables or KPIs which would be preferable, and also how you can shift the risk back to the supplier as well as part of that process?
Yeah, so probably the best example is mergers and acquisitions. An M&A transaction has, for want of a better explanation, a start, a middle, and an end. There's the due diligence and the bidding process on an acquisition. The middle is the post signing, and then the end is the fully integrated part of the full integration of that organisation into yours, and the reverse for a divestment with some slightly different steps. Now, traditionally, firms that pitch on M&A advisory will say, well, look, we can spend X number of hours or X number of days doing due diligence on this, and this is what's required. Typically, you need some seniors, some juniors, some offshore services, some admin, some travel, and package it up. And my view is that if these firms have done enough of these M&A transactions in the past, not only for you as the current client, but previous clients, they've got a sound body of information as to what that start, middle, and end looks like. That can help the client scope that better, not only in terms of what needs to be delivered, but when it needs to be delivered, to what satisfaction, and also what are the risks that you will accumulate during that start, middle, and end of the transaction. So if they've done it enough times, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to quite closely scope out the number of known activities, have an allowance for overruns and unexpected items that you might encounter, as you do, and then package it all up, and then look at a fixed fee for that, which then shifts the onus back to the firm to deliver that for all of those things in the scope for the required sum. And I've seen a real shift in that over the past couple of years, because some of these firms would expect time and materials and then an automatic success fee on the end of it. And quite often success is not actually success, it's just doing their job. And for that mind, I'm of the same opinion that I only pay a tip for exceptional service, like generous tip for exceptional services. If I'm in a restaurant, same thing here. If you can actually identify what they did that actually increased the value that you received from them, then you find a way of rewarding them for that, commensurate on what they've inputted and what you've received as the client. In terms of KPIs are quite a difficult thing to measure, because quite often the KPIs are legacy and historic. Quite often they measure the wrong things, and quite often clients spend a long time measuring the wrong things from historic measurements that don't have any current relevance. We pulled apart a tax engagement in the DAC region a couple of months ago, and found that the KPIs dated back to 2003, and none of them were relevant for the services that were being performed. They just kept on being performed. The KPI reports would come through, they'd get filed as soon as they came through, but no one actually questioned what they were doing. Things like timeliness, things like accuracy, things like cost overruns, things like awareness of new developments that could actually bring a bonus. So I'm a little bit skeptical around KPIs and SLAs unless they actually add value to the engagement. In a lot of cases, they don't, unless it's a repetitive, repeatable series of activities that you can measure consistently and realistically with objective data. If not, then you probably should question what you're doing with them to begin with.
When you go to an organization which is spending a lot of money out of all sorts of different departments, different budgets, different stakeholders on professional services, what kind of techniques do you have to start putting some controls in place? So to try to manage some of those, maybe, thousands of suppliers, certainly hundreds of suppliers.
You'd be more accurate with thousands. With global organisations, I think the company I'm with at the moment has something like 23,000 suppliers across the globe in the indirect space. So that's anything that's not actually going to the production of or development of a drug. My starting point is my data gathering exercise starts with answering the basic procurement questions. What are you buying? From whom? At what rate? Under what model? For what purpose? And that for what purpose right at the end is a bit of a catch-all. If you can justify it, if you can justify that you need to continue spending that money, that's great. If you can't justify it, that's your first place to cull or consolidate or leverage. But answering those basic procurement questions is no different to us going into the supermarket on a weekend and speccing out what we're doing for meals during the course of the week. It's just with a lot of other people's money for a higher risk. But that helps you do the segmentation. So you can then carve it down to, right, is it going into the production process or is it essentially back office? You then start to look at things like, does it have a technology input or a regulatory input that then says that you would have specialists on that. So you do that segmentation there based on that spend and the sorts of suppliers that you would typically have. A lot of organisations have got this spend mapping nailed down. Now, whether they've got it nailed down, whether they've got a specific nomenclature as to what spend goes where and how you would characterise a spend from, say, a law firm, that might be advisory, it might be legal, it might be due diligence, it might be deal related. They've all got that data. In my mind, the big challenge is making sure that data is characterized appropriately so that if you look at the current example of 23,000 suppliers, you then start to segment that into more manageable chunks so that you don't have generalists looking at specialist topics. I don't touch IT because I'm not a specialist in it. I know how to. I know the sorts of things that to look for, but I know that there are other people more qualified to look at it than me. Same with people in organisation, HR type categories. I know how it's related, but there are others that know it better than me. And that's where you have specialists to start looking at special topics, to look at special commercials, and then also assess the special risks.
What advice would you have for others who want to drive transformation and innovation in their own professional services sourcing? Have you got 3 top tips you could share?
Yeah, so know your data and make sure that data is as hyper accurate as you can. I mean, I go down to 2 decimal places. I go down to, we use US dollars, so I go down to cents, because that's proof that you've actually got a really, really strong handle around your spend. So one is know your data. The second one is know your stakeholders and what's important for them, because without the first, you can't then have a conversation with the stakeholders. That's the sort of thing where you can live or die, and your reputation within an organisation can live or die if you don't have the right sorts of conversations and open those conversations up. Third one, this is very broad, is never go to a negotiation or a discussion without a strong, powerful stakeholder in your back pocket. If you have the support of your customer, you can get a whole lot more achieved, because that way the industry and the suppliers you're dealing with don't divide and conquer you as the client. They see that you're aligned with your stakeholder. There's no way through that. You've got an aligned position on commercials, on quality, on delivery, on projects, on future work, on opportunities, on the good, the bad, and the ugly of dealing with that supplier. And that's across a number of different factors. It's not just a negotiation. If you have a strong relationship with your supplier, with your internal client, it achieves so much more. They see you as an extra pair of hands, as an extra brain to deliver something, and you have a lot stronger position on your negotiation, and also your strategizing for how to look at a medium to long term approach to particular challenges that are coming up in the business and the industry.
And finally, if there was one thing that the pharma industry could do to be more cost effective, what would be your one wish for the industry?
In terms of cost, there's an obvious one, to consolidate your supply base and shift to a more balanced approach to where those services are being delivered from. That's a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
However, I've never bought anything on the basis of cost alone. I always buy on a mixture of cost, obviously, because you don't have limited resources. You've got limited resources, but you've got to balance that against the qualitative factors that might not seem as important as the cost lines. So that's service delivery, assurance, quality, history, knowledge, other tangible and intangible attributes of dealing with the supplier. Just because a deal looks cheap does not make it necessarily a good deal. It just makes it a cheap deal. So there's always that balance between not overspending, but also not underspending, knowing that you get your core requirements qualitatively measured and reflected. If you've got a legal firm that you want to do business with or is helping you mitigate a risk, cheaper is not better, because your potential $10 million engagement of that might then result, if it's managed poorly, might result in an adverse $1 billion claim against you. But then again, there's no reason why you should spend or you should overspend in order to mitigate that. So it's about finding that right balance and picking apart your engagement with that firm to understand how they can best serve you. If you can't justify that, if you're just going out of habit, if you're going out of reflex for picking up the phone to Magic Circle or White Shoe Firm out of habit, then you're potentially not getting the best deal, and you're potentially just providing them with increased revenue, but not actually mitigating the risk that you might be absorbing in your own business.
Cameron, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. That's really interesting.
No worries, Luke. And look, it's been a pleasure.
Head to pharmasource.global to join the community of pharma procurement and partnering leaders.